In accordance with Standing Order 43, the time for members' statements has concluded. We move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. This morning, the energy regulator released data showing electricity bills surging under this government by up to 25% for households and 29% for small businesses. The Prime Minister explicitly and repeatedly promised, less than a month before last year's election, that he would deliver cheaper electricity and an annual cut of $275 to electricity bills. Prime Minister, how can Australians already suffering cost of living challenges possibly trust the Albanese government to keep this promise?
Do not interject when the Leader is asking his question. It goes to both sides. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Today, Claire Savage, the Chair of the Australian Energy Regulator, said this: "It's much lower than where we were fearing it could have been last September, October." What would she know? A lot of what we have seen in the price increases today have been driven by unreliable coal plants,
Leader of the Opposition,
solar outages and very high fossil fuel prices. So that transition to clean energy is critical to bringing down prices. What we are seeing is that the contracts that retailers buy for the coming financial year have fallen quite a bit since the intervention in the coal and gas markets in October last year. So they are about 40% lower than they were in October last year. That's what Claire Savage said. The Chair of the Australian Energy Regulator
will cease ejecting.
Mr Speaker, he promised to smile more if they made him leader, but I've seen no
the Prime
evidence,
Minister will return to the question.
I've seen, there it is.
Order.
That cheeky little smile.
The order. Members on my right and the member for Page will cease to eject, and the member for Gippsland. So I can hear from the Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, on relevance, this Prime Minister might treat the Australian public like a joke, but use his own words. You promised.
Resume your seat. Order. Order. Just before the Prime Minister continues, the Leader of the Opposition knows he has a great deal of latitude. Points of order for the rest of today will be made in accordance with the standing orders, which will be simply to state the point of order, which is relevance, and no further commentary. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. He's angry because he knows that he voted against. That he voted against helping people. He voted against $3 billion in direct bill relief. He voted against the price caps on gas and coal that the energy regulator was speaking about today. He's angry because he opposed the safeguard mechanism, their own policy, supported by business and industry.
The member for
He's
Deakin
angry because he was a part of a government that had 22 energy policies but didn't land one. He's angry because he left us with an energy grid that was built for the last century. He's angry because his government gave $4 million to the proponents of a coal-fired power plant in Collinsville, knowing that there was no chance,
cease interjecting,
that it would actually go forward. Those opposite are frozen in time while the world warms around them. Those opposite have no way forward. We have had practical measures put forward in this parliament to deal with the challenges that have arisen, that are global challenges, that have had a global impact, and those opposite left us with a policy that simply wasn't landed. We're going forward and making a difference.
Order. Member for Bowman will cease interjecting. So I can hear from the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. What is the government's response to the release of today's default market offer, and what action has the government taken to shield Australians from the worst of the global energy crisis? Are there any threats to this action?
The House will come to order. The member for O'Connor needs to be reminded that it is not the time before the minister has spoken to say a word. The member for Herbert is not helping either. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for Werriwa for the question. She's a very strong advocate for south-western Sydney, and she knows the importance of supporting families and households in places just like south-western Sydney through the period of elevated energy prices. And what the default market offer released by the energy regulator Claire Savage this morning does is confirm ongoing pressure on power prices and the ongoing relief provided by the Albanese government and the importance of that relief. And in terms of the announcement made this morning by Claire Savage, she has indicated, for example, the default market offer, which is a safety net offer about 1 in 10 households are on. In New South Wales, our home state, we've seen a 21% increase, which compared to what the energy regulator indicated to the government was likely of a 40% increase absent intervention. And in relation to those households, 1.6 million in New South Wales, for example, who've received the rebates negotiated by the Treasurer on behalf of the Commonwealth and the states and territories, they, instead of facing a 40% increase in power bills, will see an 8% decrease, an 8% cut in their energy bills as a result of the intervention of the Albanese government. And there are similar figures right around the country. Taking South Australia, for example, in which we were facing a 51% increase, we've instead seen a 24% increase, and after the impact of the rebates, a 3% cut in their energy bills. So that was the choice facing the Australian Parliament, whether to let these increases flow through to Australian households doing it tough, to Australian businesses doing it tough, or to intervene and act. And the government chose to intervene and act, and we've seen the impact of that today. And indeed, as the Prime Minister indicated, the regulator has in crystal clear language made the importance of that intervention clear early today, saying that these increases would have had a 5 in front of them in the absence of action. And we've seen a similar response in the Australian Energy Council, who's talked about the impact of the rebates. And not only did those opposite vote against, the honourable member asked me about threats, not only did those opposite vote against the intervention, the Leader of the Opposition has doubled down, not admitted they got it wrong, and said he would rip up this intervention if he became Prime Minister. He would repeal the intervention. He would see these power price increases flow through to Australians without any intervention on his behalf, any stepping forward to protect Australians against the impact of these increases. He would just let them rip. That's his policy, let these increases rip. Well, this government has a different approach. Whether in south-western Sydney or suburbs or regions, anywhere in Australia, this government will intervene to protect you from the impact of these power price rises. We will intervene to ensure support for Australians, while the alternative...
Order. There is far too much noise in the chamber, particularly coming from over here. If this continues, people won't be warned, they'll be asked to leave. Give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Hard-working Australian households and small businesses received news today that they will see huge increases in their electricity prices from July 1. Each year, households will be worse off by $594 in New South Wales, $512 in South Australia and $402 in South East Queensland, even though the Prime Minister promised they would be $275 better off. Why did the Prime Minister break his promise and lie to the Australian people?
I think I know what the Leader of the House is going to say, but I want to hear from him.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition knows that that was out of order, and I ask, one, that it be withdrawn as unparliamentary, but two, that action be considered into whether the question remains on foot at all.
The question is out of order, but I'm going to give the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. opposition a chance to rephrase it, just to withdraw the last part of the question, start a question again without that inference at the end.
I withdraw the last part of the question, Mr Speaker, and my question remains to the Prime Minister. Hard-working Australian households and small businesses received news today that they will see huge increases in their electricity prices from July 1. Each year, households will be worse off by $594 in New South Wales, $512 in South Australia and $402 in South East Queensland, even though the Prime Minister promised they would be $275 better off. Why did the Prime Minister break his promise to the Australian people?
Call to the Prime Minister. Order. The member for Deakin, I just warned the member for O'Connor about saying things before the Prime Minister or any other minister speaks. You'll be warned now. If you say one more thing during question time, you'll be asked to leave. You've been continually disruptive all throughout the week. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And I'm asked about promises with regard to energy. And at the 2019 election, of course, the Coalition promised to reduce the wholesale price of electricity to $70 per megawatt by the end of 2021. Spoiler alert, it didn't happen, Mr Speaker. By the time they left office, the price was $286. So they promised 70 and they delivered 286. That was what we inherited. The member for Hume, when they were in charge also, promised $1 billion to deliver 3,800 megawatts of new power generation. Spoiler alert, didn't happen. Not a single kilowatt. Not one. Not a single dollar.
Order.
Not even a watt. Not a why, but not a watt. They promised also the feasibility study on Collinsville, didn't even publish a study. The proponents got $4 million. $4 million. For what? For what? They produced less than Barnaby Joyce produced as an envoy.
Order. Members on my left and right. The Prime Minister is using the incorrect titles for members, and I ask him to refer to all members by the correct order. And I want to hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
On relevance, Mr Speaker, the question was very clearly about the Prime Minister's policies, this government's policies, and their lack of consistency with what they promised. Standing orders are very clear. Ministers can be asked about and can respond about what the government is doing. The Prime Minister is off on a frolic and he should be brought back to the question.
No, I'm just going to call the... If I'm trying to rule on a point of order, I don't need assistance from people interjecting. I was going to say the Prime Minister has had a decent... I just call the Prime Minister in continuation. Order.
Seriously, Mr Speaker.
Order. Order. The Leader of the Opposition will cease objecting. The House is going to come to order. There is a general warning for the entire House now. The Prime Minister will be heard in silence, otherwise action will be taken.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And we also had, of course, promises about Liddell, which the former minister, former member for Kooyong, used to stand here and speak about keeping it open, promised time and time again. It closed at the end of April exactly as was planned under their watch. Exactly what was planned. What we've done is put in place a real plan of $3 billion of energy price relief that they voted against, up to $500 in bill relief for eligible households, up to $650 in bill relief for small businesses. Real relief, right off your power bill, right when you need it. We provided in the budget $1.6 billion for energy efficiency upgrades, including the new small business energy incentive. With Rewiring the Nation, $16 billion has been provided to unlock the grid, to upgrade it so that it's able to accept more renewable energy. Signed Marinus Link, talked about by those opposite, but nothing happened. Declared the first offshore wind zone in Australia. Deployed 400 community batteries are being deployed across Australia. We've implemented the Capacity Investment Scheme to unlock over $10 billion of investment in batteries, pumped hydro and more renewables in our grid. We have practical plans. Every one of them is opposed by the naysayers opposite.
Has concluded. I'll hear from the member for Reid.
My question is to the Treasurer. Why is a methodical, consistent, responsible approach to managing the economy and budget so important, and what are the consequences of not doing so?
The member for Barker is now warned. Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Thank you to the wonderful member for Reid for her question. Over the past 12 months, the Albanese Labor government has begun the hard yards of repairing the budget and building a stronger and fairer and more secure economy. And our responsible economic management is leading to smaller deficits, less debt, less interest costs and a forecast surplus for this year. At the same time, we're delivering cost-of-living relief for Australians doing it tough, and today's DMO confirms we've helped shield people from the worst of the energy price spikes. Now, in an uncertain global environment, our methodical and consistent approach is building buffers against global uncertainty and making our economy more resilient to external shocks. Now, you contrast that, Mr Speaker, with what we've heard from the Leader of the Opposition since his budget reply a couple of weeks ago. It's been 2 weeks since the budget reply, and the reason why we don't get any questions about the budget from those opposite is because their budget reply is already falling down around them in a shambolic mess. And let me give you a few examples of that, Mr Speaker. Now, the big idea that the Leader of the Opposition had was to bring back work for the dole. And then the only problem with that was work for the dole hadn't been abolished. And it was in the budget. There's thousands of people participating in work for the dole, but he wants to bring it back. It's already happening, but he wants to bring it back. 2 weeks ago, he came up with this big idea about JobSeeker. He wanted to change the way JobSeeker did. 2 weeks later, they still can't tell us how much it costs. And whenever they're asked, they'll say, we'll tell you later on, but we want you to support it now. Mr Speaker, they have questions from up the back about how they want more people coming to Australia, and then up the front about how they want fewer people coming to Australia. And that's because they've been busted trying to play two different tunes with the same dog whistle, Mr Speaker. It hasn't dawned on them, Mr Speaker. It still hasn't dawned on them, Mr Speaker, that they're using a measure of inflation that strips out energy and food costs, which they're arguing is the main driver of inflation. Mr Speaker, it hasn't dawned on them that when they argue about the net policy impact, the $20 billion net policy impact from our budget, that is half of the net policy impact of the last budget that they had, yet they pretend ours is inflationary and theirs is not inflationary, Mr Speaker. They say they want smaller deficits, but they want to spend more money on defence, and they want to give bigger tax breaks for people who've already got tens of millions of dollars in super, Mr Speaker. They said on budget night that they supported all along our energy plan, right? The same energy plan. The only problem with that, it's the same energy plan they came in here and voted against, Mr Speaker. This is the usual coalition bin fire of haplessness and hopelessness and heartlessness. They've gone from born to rule to born to rot, Mr Speaker, and you see that in the $1 trillion of debt that they left us with almost nothing to show for it.
Order. The member for Riverina does not need to interject. Before I call the member for Goldstein, I'm pleased to inform the House that present at the gallery today is the Australian Political Exchange Council's 14th delegation from the Philippines, led by Ms Eunice Balbacon. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you all. Give the call to the member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Speaker. To the Health Minister. Recently, 16-year-old Katya from my electorate contacted me about the death of her 15-year-old friend due to an eating disorder. Katya says, "The fact that the system is so bad that it caused a once young, passionate girl full of life to commit suicide is so sickening. I can't even express my words for how disgusted I am." On behalf of Katya and her friend, whose memorial service was this morning, why was there no new funding for eating disorder treatment in the budget?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Goldstein for her question and send, I imagine, all of our condolences to Katia and to her friends, family and other friends as well. I want to pay credit to the member's advocacy around this issue from the day she arrived in this place, and she works across the aisle with others who've been impacted either directly or through their community representation by this devastating condition. We know it hits people in the prime of their life when they've got so much potential before them. We know it's incredibly difficult to treat, sometimes difficult to diagnose. We know it's incredibly dangerous, as this tragedy reminds us again. It is the single medical illness with the highest mortality rate of all of the medical illnesses. You also know, and we've talked about this, Member for Goldstein, that there has been an increase in presentations right across the country through the COVID period, which has proved very stubborn. It hasn't yet started to subside, unlike some other health impacts of the pandemic. And historically, we all know that there has not been enough good evidence-based treatment that's generally and historically been provided at state level. Now, we are trying to do more at a Commonwealth level, and to his very great credit, my predecessor Greg Hunt put in place a new Medicare program that provides up to 40 additional psychological sessions and 20 dietitian sessions per year. That's been running for 3 years now. I think it's time to evaluate that program, the impact it's had on the community through a difficult period. More than 500,000 sessions of care under that program have already been delivered, which is a great thing, but hasn't changed the picture or shifted the dial sufficiently. As you also know, there was money allocated by the former government to state governments for residential treatment centres. I've written to them. We've talked about this not moving quickly enough. I'm hopeful of announcements, including in your state, very soon, so that can actually get up and running. We've allocated $20 million for competitive community grants, which we're about to announce as well. In the budget 2 weeks ago, we did allocate new funding for this area. It was new funding for services that were otherwise not going to be funded beyond the 30th of June. The residential treatment centre you're familiar with in the Sunshine Coast, Wandinnerida, needed additional funding beyond the 30th of June. The Butterfly Bright, Body Bright program, terrific service, and a range of others as well. One of the areas that you and I have talked about, Member for Goldstein, where there has never been enough effort in this area is the area of research. And I'm examining options to lift the research capability, the funding from government for research into this terrible area of mental illness, and I'll have more to say about that in the near future.
And on indulgence, I'll call the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, I want to lend the support of the opposition to the work of the Minister. I want to send my condolences to the family and to the friends of this young individual, this young Australian whose life has been cut short at a very early stage. It is one of the most confounding issues for us as a country to deal with. There are members in this parliament who have close family members who have been affected by this disorder, and it's a very clear message that as a parliament we should send the government, the crossbench, everybody here, that it's an issue that we want to do whatever we can to further address. When we were in government, there were 64 new Medicare items for eating disorders, meaning that patients, as the Minister pointed out, can access up to 40 psychological and 20 diabetic services a year. If more needs to be done, more should be done, and particularly in the research area, through the Medical Research Future Fund or other areas of endeavour that we could support in a bipartisan way, we would apply ourselves to that and provide full support to the government's efforts.
We call to the member for Hawke.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to ensure early learning is more affordable for Australian families, whilst also ensuring a child's education is of the highest quality?
Call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and Minister for Youth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Hawke for his question, and I just want to acknowledge the member for Hawke's tireless work in representing the families and the children in the electorate of Hawke. Mr Speaker, all parents want the best for their children. A life of opportunities, a life filled with lifelong learning, a life full of experiences that help them thrive. And on this side of the House, we want the same for every Australian child. No matter where they live, no matter what their circumstances, no matter what their background. The Albanese Labor government wants every child to have the very best start in life. And on Public Education Day, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the work of my colleague, the Minister for Education, in ensuring that that best start in life is continued right through schooling through our public education system. Now, a key part of that is access to high-quality and affordable early childhood education. That's why we're delivering on our commitment to make early childhood education more affordable for 1.2 million families right across Australia from July 1st. That's just over a month away. That's why we're building on Labor's legacy to ensure that early childhood education and care in Australia is of the highest quality. And that's why we announced in the last budget measures to help build the capacity of the early learning workforce. Now, these measures are a direct response to the presentations and the consultations that I have had with stakeholders and educators in the sector, and I want to thank them for their engagement. They told me that they want and they need professional development, but they often can't get it. They told me that the financial stress of having to undertake practicums was often a disincentive to further study and upskilling. So what we've done is allocate $72 million in the budget to support professional development and practicums. These measures have been widely welcomed by the sector, including by Elizabeth Deeth from ELACA, who said, and I quote, "Having the opportunity to undertake professional development and skills training will enable the workforce to build up their expertise and ensure that they have the support they need to advance in their careers." Mr Speaker, this government recognises the professionals who educate and care for our children. We believe in the value of early learning, and we heed the evidence about brain development in those first 5 years of a child's life. That's why we're committed to an affordable, world-class early childhood education and care system, a system that works for every Australian family and for every Australian child.
Give the call to the honourable member for Fairfax. Order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question goes to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Darren Pilcher has been a local cafe owner on the Sunshine Coast for the past 8.5 years. And he's just gone through one of the toughest years in business under this Labor government. Darren's electricity bill has risen 60% over the last year and gas up to 50%. Why are power bills going up when the Prime Minister promised they would go down?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. The Minister has the call.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I appreciate the question from the honourable member for Fairfax, especially given it's the first one he's asked me since February, Mr Speaker, since February, and here we are in May, and I'm very delighted to get a question from my Shadow Minister, Mr Speaker. In fact, I appreciate the Shadow Minister generally. Generally, I appreciate him, Mr Speaker. It's very important to me that he stays in his current role. Now, Mr Speaker, in relation to Queensland small businesses, it's also the case that because of this government's intervention, the increase that Queensland small businesses are facing has gone from 43% down to 22% as a result of the intervention of this government, Mr Speaker, an intervention those opposite, one, would not have imposed, and secondly, would repeal. The Leader of the Opposition was at the APIA conference a couple of weeks ago promising to rip them up. I say APIA, you say APIA. I say renewables, you say nuclear. Let's call the whole thing off. Let's call the whole thing off, Mr Speaker. Now, the Leader of the Opposition was promising to rip up the intervention. He was channeling his inner Reagan. He was saying he was like Ronald Reagan. He was saying, "Mr Albanese, tear down this bill relief," he was saying, Mr Speaker. That was his message at the APIA conference. Well, we're not going to stop the bill relief. We're going to continue with the bill relief for businesses and for households right around the country, because that's what good governments do.
Order. House comes to order. I'll hear from the member for Macon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government's cheaper medicine policy making healthcare more affordable? Why is this important, and how is it helping to change the lives of Australians? How have the pressures on costs of medicines changed over time?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank my friend the member for Macon, who has proudly served his community for more than 3 decades in the north and north-eastern suburbs of Adelaide, first as mayor and then for a long time in this place. And he's been a relentless advocate for better healthcare services in the areas that he serves. Like the rest of us, the member campaigned very hard at the last election on our promise to make medicines cheaper, and we're delivering on that promise by listing more life-saving, life-changing medicines on the PBS and by cutting the script prices for millions and millions of patients. Yesterday I had the absolute pleasure, Mr Speaker, of joining 3 extraordinary young Australians and their parents. Oscar, who's 10 and the Deputy Prime Minister would be pleased to hear, a fierce Geelong Football Club supporter, Ari, who's 12, and 3-year-old Kira from the Sunshine Coast. All 3 of these kids have achondroplasia, the most common form of dwarfism. The 140 kids born with this condition every year are 50 times more likely than other babies not to live beyond 5 years of age. And if they do survive, they'll likely have to endure multiple major surgeries and live for years with pain and disability. Yesterday we celebrated the PBS listing of an extraordinary new drug, Voxzogo, a treatment that was proven through global clinical trials led here by researchers at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute down in Melbourne. This drug is going to transform the lives of all of these kids. Without the PBS listing, though, the drug that they'll have to take from early infancy up until the time their growth plates close at 16 or 18 would cost $330,000 every single year. Under the PBS, it will cost just $30 a script. And, Mr Speaker, we're also committed to cutting the price of PBS scripts for patients. On January 1st, I've said a couple of times in this place, we delivered the biggest cut to the price of medicines in the 75-year history of the PBS. Mr Speaker, in the budget we announced that we've also accepted advice from the experts in the PBS to allow patients to access up to 60 days' supply of common medicines for chronic disease. This will halve the cost of those medicines for 6 million patients, which is why our decision has been supported by a long, long list of patients groups. It will also halve the number of routine visits to GPs to get a repeat script, freeing up millions of GP consults every year for other patients, which again is why our decision has been supported by every single doctors group in this country. Now, of course, Mr Speaker, we will reinvest every single dollar the Commonwealth saves from this change back into community pharmacy, but this government is deeply committed to delivering cheaper and cheaper medicines for Australians. It's good for their hip pocket and it's also good for their health.
Call to the honourable member for Flynn.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. The Minister stated in a speech on the 24th of September 2022 that Australia will need to install 22,000 solar panels every day and 40 wind turbines every month by 2030 to reach the government's 82% renewable energy target. It has been over 240 days since this speech. Can the Minister provide an update of how many solar panels and wind turbines have been installed in this timeframe?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Very happy to. Very happy to. Investment in large-scale renewables is up 55% under this government, Mr Speaker. We've had 7.1 gigawatts committed of investment in renewable energy, Mr Speaker, since this government was elected. That's the update for the honourable member. We on this side are very proud of renewable energy. They pretend, some of them pretend to support renewable energy. Some of them, like the member for Flynn, to his credit, don't bother to pretend.
Order. Order. When the House, the member for Dawson, the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Social Services. How is the social services portfolio delivering on the Albanese Labor government's commitments to prioritise action on ending family, domestic and sexual violence to create a better future for all Australians?
The call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Macquarie for the question. The Albanese government has not wasted a single day in delivering our plan to build a better future for all Australians, and this, of course, includes in the social services portfolio. In our first 12 months, we've delivered on our commitments, laying a strong foundation for a better future for all Australians. We've already delivered over 16,000 older Australians who have now been granted the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card who would not have been eligible previously. We've also legislated measures to support pensioners who are downsizing their homes, and we've frozen deeming rates. We've delivered the promised doubling of funding for disability representative organisations and have begun development on the National Autism Strategy. We've improved paid parental leave and we're expanding it so that parents can access 6 months, and we're strengthening the social safety net by providing an additional cost of living relief for those on the lowest income. And of course, a key priority for this government has been taken action to address family, domestic and sexual violence. We have delivered the 10-year national plan to end violence against women and children in one generation. We've backed that commitment up by a $2 billion record investment in women's safety initiatives. And in the most recent budget, we've committed $159 million to extend funding for women's safety frontline services. We've delivered the National Partnerships Agreement that was due to cease.
The Minister will pause. Deputy Leader of the Opposition, when I say cease interjecting, that means cease interjecting. No more interjections. Give the call to the Minister for Social Security.
Thank you. As I was saying, the National Partnerships Agreement, which was due to cease on the 30th of June this year unless we intervened. This is in addition to the funding 500 extra community and support workers for women and children experiencing family, domestic and sexual violence. We've made significant funding commitments to First Nations family safety initiatives. We've legislated 10 days of paid family and domestic violence leave, which women are now accessing to keep them safe. And we've delivered more than $352 million over 2 budgets to extend, improve and expand the escaping violence payment. Of course, this program was left in absolute shambles by the previous government, and our government has been fixing the mess. When we came to government, Speaker, there was a backlog of more than 4,000 people waiting for their payment to be processed. Wait times for payments were on average 33 business days from the date the claim was raised to being dealt with. This was unacceptable. Now, I'm pleased to advise the House that at the end of April 2023, victim survivors are having their claims dealt with on average within 6 business days. This is making a real difference to people and fixing the mess that they left us. Speaker, in 12 months, the Albanese government is delivering on our commitments to make a meaningful difference in the lives of Australians.
Concluded. Give the call. Member for Page. I want to hear from the member for Hughes.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister aware of the Victoria Premier's $8.6 billion decade of tax on businesses and property investors in that state? Yesterday, the Premier encouraged Victorians to use his so-called COVID debt levy to offset their Commonwealth tax obligations, costing Australian taxpayers $3 billion over the next 4 years.
Order.
Does the Prime Minister support Premier Andrews' decision to slug Victorians with $8.6 billion of taxes?
Order. Members on my left. The question was about the Victorian budget, but I just want to hear from the Leader of the House.
Yeah. Mr Speaker, ministers are to be asked under standing orders for what's within their portfolio. It is open to any member of the parliament to contest a state election, but in terms of if question time starts to become commentary on every state issue, it fundamentally just undermines what question time's here for.
Order. Order. I want to hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, it very clearly has an implication on Commonwealth revenues, as indeed the Victorian Premier has explicitly pointed out, and that's why it goes squarely to the Prime Minister's responsibilities.
If it was, the question was around the impact to the Commonwealth budget or something the Prime Minister, that was not part of the question. I agree with the Manager of Opposition, but the end part of the question was, do you support the Victorian state budget? That was the part of the question that was asked. So I'm going to allow the question, but I just say, for the benefit for members for future, when framing questions, if it can be related directly to the Prime Minister or the Minister's responsibility, that question is going to be totally within standing orders. So because of the respect I have for the member for Hughes, I'm going to allow the Prime Minister to address the end part of the question.
I'm not sure what bit that was, Mr Speaker. But I'm happy to talk about budgets. I'm happy to talk about our budget, which I'm responsible for as the person who chairs the Cabinet. I'm happy to talk about our boost to bulk billing, helping 11 million Australians see a doctor for free. I'm happy to talk about halving medicine costs.
The Prime Minister will pause. The Minister for Climate Change is not helping and will cease interjecting or be warned. I want to hear from the order. I want to hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And to assist you, as you directed, the question was, and you directed the Prime Minister to the last part of the question, does the Prime Minister support Premier Andrews' decisions to slug Victorians with $8.6 billion of taxes?
Well, I was listening carefully to the manager, and I was hoping that would be a cue, because the question was about responsibilities of the Victorian budget, which the Prime Minister does not have responsibility for. That is clear understanding orders, but we're just going to allow this question to go, and I'm just going to get the Prime Minister to be as relevant as he can to the question. Order.
I'm trying to help him out, Mr Speaker. Trying to help him out. It's a very generous ruling, of course, that you have made. And I support the federal budget that has benefits for every single state and every territory in this country. Victorian aged care workers will benefit massively from the 15% pay increase that will occur. They'll benefit from the additional Medicare urgent care clinics that are there. They'll benefit from the Getting Wages moving that's occurring as well. Victorians will benefit from the energy bill relief that we put in place. Victorians will benefit, those people who are searching for work and are job seeker will benefit from the $40 a fortnight increase. And many Victorians as well, particularly single mums, will welcome the additional support by extending the single parenting payment from the youngest child reaching 8 up to the youngest child reaching 14. Victorians will benefit from the increased rent assistance, for the biggest increase in 30 years. They'll benefit from the 10 days family and domestic violence leave. They'll benefit from the energy efficiency measures that we have there as well. And Victorian small businesses will certainly welcome the small business incentives that are in place as a result, including the expansion of the instant asset write-off. Victorians, of course, will benefit greatly from our budget. And when I've been in Victoria, in the electorate of Higgins, with the member for Higgins, they're visiting a medicine centre, talking with doctors about the benefit that they will have from our plan to increase the incentive by 3 times the bulk billing incentive. That will make an enormous difference as well. When I was in the electorate of Goldstein, there at the Brighton pub, I suspect the first ever Labor Prime Minister to visit Brighton, they will certainly said that the budget was very well received. And when I was in McEwen at a childcare centre in McEwen just a week ago, they certainly were very pleased that cheaper childcare will come in on July 1. I'll be in Ballarat in a short period of time.
Order. Prime Minister's time has concluded. Order. I want to hear from the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How has the Albanese Labor government cleaned up the mess of a wasted decade in skills, and how is the government continuing to work to give Australians the skills and training they need for the jobs and opportunities of the future?
Give a call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Thanks, Speaker, and can I thank the member for Robertson for his question, and I look forward to catching up with him at the Gosford TAFE in the near future. Speaker, in the last 12 months, the Albanese government has not wasted a minute. That's because we're a government that responds to the national challenges that we confront. It's why we're laying a stronger foundation for a better future. It's also because upon election, not only had we inherited $1 trillion of Liberal Party and National Party debt, we were bequeathed by those opposite a massive skills deficit across the entire economy. And for that reason, in fact, if you want to hear a few more statistics, in fact, in 1 year, the occupations on the shortage list went from 153 to 286, almost doubling in 1 year. The OECD cited that Australia's labour shortage per capita was the second highest amongst OECD countries when we came to government, Speaker. So we were dealing with massive challenges, and that's why the government immediately, very quickly, convened the Jobs and Skills Summit, bringing together industry, employers and unions, universities and the vet sector, state and territory governments, because we know to deal with these national challenges we must work together. We created, of course, Jobs and Skills Australia. That's providing strategic advice to deliver the skills, existing skills that are in demand and those skills that are emerging in the labour market, striking a 12-month agreement with all state and territory governments to deliver 180,000 fee-free vet and TAFE places, 150,000 of which are already filled, strengthening and targeting support for apprentices to lift completion rates, encouraging more women into trade apprenticeships through improved financial and non-financial support, supplying new energy apprentices to assist with the massive demand in the renewable energy sector. 1,000 of those apprentices have already been enrolled. But there's so much more work to be done, Mr Speaker. This includes, of course, negotiating a further 300,000 fee-free TAFE and vet places from 2024 and finalising a $3.7 billion national skills agreement which will provide greater access to the vet sector. And this agreement will be the vehicle where we will bring about significant reforms to the vet sector to ensure that it's fit for purpose. Speaker, we've been busy over the last 12 months, but we know there's a lot more to do. So those opposite can keep carping and saying no to everything. We'll just continue to deliver to Australian students, workers, businesses and the economy.
Just before I call the member for Wentworth, I was a little early before with the welcome for the Political Exchange Council's delegation from the Philippines, who are now here, and I welcome their delegation with Ms Eunice Balbacon. A very well welcome to our parliament. And I'll give the call to the member for Wentworth.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister for the Environment and Water. This week, the Labor government in Victoria said it would end native forest logging. Yet Australia has the highest rate of deforestation in the developed world, and the federal government allows native forest logging to continue in New South Wales and Tasmania. When will the minister put an end to native forest logging across the whole of Australia?
Give the call to the Minister for the Environment and the Minister for Water.
Thank you so much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Wentworth for her question. I know that she is absolutely committed to better environmental protection around Australia, and like us here, as part of the Albanese Labor government, believes that we need to protect more of what's precious, restore more of what's damaged and manage nature better for the future. She's quite right that we saw some very big news from Victoria during the week, following a few months ago on news from Western Australia about their native forest logging industry. I'd say to the member for Wentworth that we are very supportive and know that it's important to have forestry industry here in Australia. That's why the Albanese Labor government put $300 million into upgrading the the equipment for having more sophisticated forestry uses in Australia, into better training the workforce, and very importantly into expanding plantations, which already provide about 90% of our forestry needs here in Australia. On the issue of native forests in New South Wales and other parts of Australia, I think it's very important to acknowledge that forests are very important carbon sequestration providers. They're very important habitat. As the Minister for the Environment, obviously I'm very concerned to ensure that forests that are homes for leadbeater possums, for greater gliders, for of course koalas, which are endangered now, continue to offer those important homes and habitats for those creatures. And so we are determined to make sure, as we update the environment protection laws, that regional forest agreements come under our new national environment standards, and we're working very closely with the states, with the industry and with the conservation movement to make sure that happens.
Give the call to the honourable member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry. How is the Albanese Labor government growing the workforce we need in Australia's defence industry? Why are these measures needed, and how do they differ from the actions of former governments?
Give the call to the Minister for Defence Industry and the Minister for International Development and the Pacific.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Boothby for her question and her passionate advocacy for the South Australian defence industry. The truth is that the Australian defence industry is a critical input to our national defence. Over 100,000 Australian defence industry workers get up every day to support the men and women of the Australian Defence Force. And this will increase as we increase our defence funding to deal with our strategic challenges that we're seeing at the moment. 20,000 direct jobs will be created supporting the nuclear-propelled submarines alone. And the truth is, Speaker, we'll need many more workers as we get on with the job of implementing the Defence Strategic Review recommendations, including modernising the Australian Army, enhancing the lethality of the Royal Australian Navy, giving more strike options to the Air Force and establishing a sovereign missile manufacturing capability in this country. That means more business for Australian industry, and that means more workers are needed. And that's why the Albanese Labor government is making very significant investments. We're establishing the Skills Academy in South Australia to actually train workers to work in our submarine and surface fleet construction programs. We've announced $130 million for 4,000 additional uni places in STEM subjects, and we've allocated $11 million to the WA Defence Industries Pathway program. We're providing certainty to employers, we're taking the hard decisions around prioritising projects, and we're increasing defence funding over the decade to give employers the certainty to hire more Australian workers. And this differs from the uncertainty and chaos we saw under the last government in defence. First, they wanted to build submarines in Japan. Then they spent $3.4 billion on the attack-class submarines. Then they stuffed up their Henderson Maritime Precinct. They then spent, and this is my favourite, $114 million on the Naval Shipbuilding College. And guess how many workers they trained?
None.
Zero. Zero workers trained for $114 million of expenditure. There were 24 ministers in the defence portfolio in a shambolic 9.5 years, and the result was 28 major projects running cumulatively 97 years late and $6.5 billion over budget, and they also left a 10-year capability gap with our submarines. The truth is, Speaker, they talked a big game, but they cut $12 billion from the defence budget, and they added $42 billion of spending commitments without a single new dollar added. Without a single new dollar added. By contrast, the Albanese Labor government is providing sober adult leadership. We're increasing resources to defence to face the challenges, unlike the negative coalition over there.
Order. The Minister is warned now that term is not parliamentary. If anyone else uses that term, there will be actions. Give the call to the member for Gippsland.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and I refer the Prime Minister to his statement to timber workers prior to the election, where he said, and I quote, Labor supports your industry, your family and your community. Prime Minister, given the Victorian Labor government's decision to ban all native harvesting of timber in just 6 months, sacking thousands of workers, what support has the Prime Minister and his government actually provided for timber workers across Australia, or is this just another broken promise?
Order. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm asked the second question I've been asked today about the Victorian budget. Mr Speaker.
Order.
We know that in the last term of Parliament, the attacks were pretty consistent from the former government against the Andrews government, and we know how well that worked out for them because the Andrews government received an increased majority when they went to the people of Victoria last year. The Victorian government has a $200 million structural adjustment package in their budget, given I've been asked about it. And I certainly do support timber workers, and through the regional forestry agreements process, we work with states and territories to support Australia's forest industries to operate under high standards for environmental management and sustainable harvesting. We need timber products, and we want sustainable forestry jobs. And that's why we are investing, the Commonwealth Government, $300 million to grow plantations, modernise our timber manufacturing infrastructure and build the skills of our forestry workforce. And I note that through the National Reconstruction Fund, we specifically set aside funding to support the forestry industry. But the member for Gippsland voted against it, and everyone here voted against it as well.
The member for Gippsland on a point of order. The Prime Minister's concluded his answer, so it's not about the answer. The member for Gippsland needs to. The Prime Minister's completed his answer.
Why do you hate timber workers so much?
No. The member for Gippsland. The member for Gippsland knows what he's just done there, which is completely unparliamentary, and he will keep walking out of the chamber. The member for Gippsland, before you leave, I'm going to ask you to I'm going to ask you just to withdraw that last part of your statement. Order. Just withdraw the being gutless.
I understand on what basis, Mr Speaker?
Well, the phrase that he used was unparliamentary. It's not only abuse of standing orders, it's...
I acknowledge the abuse of standing orders and I withdraw the word hate, is that right?
You just withdraw...
Is that what I'm withdrawing? I withdraw. Thank you.
Withdraw. I thank the member to assist the House. The member for Herbert. Thank the member for Braddon. Give the call to the member for McEwen.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. How has the Albanese Labor government delivered a better future across the country in the infrastructure portfolio over its first 12 months?
Order. Members on my left. Members on my left will cease interjecting. There's going to be silence so I can hear the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for McEwen for his question. He's a tireless advocate for his community and he knows firsthand how important it is that our government deliver on our commitments. Well, over the last 12 months, that's exactly what we've been doing. First, we began the hard work of cleaning up the mess left by those opposite behind after a decade of waste and rorts and mismanagement. First, we began the hard work by reviewing Infrastructure Australia, Returning.
Order.
I can't hear, Mr. Speaker.
This has become an ongoing issue when particularly ministers are on their feet. A number of ministers. Order. We had this problem yesterday. Just going to allow the minister to be heard in silence. Can't hear a word that she's saying. It's unacceptable. Give the call to the minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, of course, we've reviewed Infrastructure Australia, returning it to its rightful place as the Commonwealth's infrastructure advisor with the bill passing this House yesterday. We're fixing the major projects that will deliver a more resilient and prosperous future, starting with Inland Rail, a project where those opposite managed to build just over 16% of the 1,700-kilometre track, but still saw costs blow out by 559%. And we're starting work on new transformative nation-building projects like high-speed rail, focusing on Newcastle to Sydney. We're partnering with Queensland to deliver the Brisbane Olympics, and we're working with the states and territories to clean up the infrastructure investment pipeline, conducting a 90-day review to make sure that the Commonwealth is investing in the projects that matter to Australians, but also so that we can invest in local government. We've ended the regional rorts that those opposite presided over. We've created new, transparent and equitable grants programs for the cities, suburbs and the regions. And thanks to these new programs, for the very first time, every local government area in the country will be eligible to apply for an open, competitive grants program to deliver much-needed community infrastructure and bring forward plans to improve precincts to transform their communities. We've invested an additional $250 million in local roads in regional, rural and peri-urban Australia, on top of the $50 million we allocated in February, and as well as the $1 billion we're rolling out through this budget to every single state and territory for road safety. That includes $270 million for road safety projects in New South Wales, $255 in Queensland and over $100 million in Victoria and Western Australia. We're building greater resilience into our supply chains through work of our Strategic Fleet Task Force, decarbonising the maritime sector with green shipping corridors, and we're setting the aviation sector up for the future with our Aviation White Paper and our Jet Zero Council. And we're working on the largest scale projects like sealing the Tanami and the more than $3.5 billion I released just this week for the Metro to Western Sydney Airport, and smaller projects like the Senator Theresa Road, which I released $17 million for just today. We're getting on with the job of building infrastructure, delivering for our regions and our great cities right the way across the country.
Call to the member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. My electorate of Brisbane has the youngest demographic in Queensland. Young people, both in Brisbane and across the country, feel left behind, struggling to afford rent, seeing their HECS debt skyrocket and watching their standards of living drop. Under changes proposed in the budget, the rate of youth allowance will be $602.80 per fortnight, just $43 a day. Young people do not get discounts on their rent or groceries, so why is youth allowance still one of the lowest income support payments?
Whoever's groaning there, the member for Holt will be warned. Give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for his question, because what we've done in this budget is a very responsible cost of living package for those doing it toughest. And of course, as part of our initiatives, we have committed to a $40 increase in the base rate of many of those working age payments. That of course includes JobSeeker, which those opposite have not made a decision about, but it also includes AbStudy, AusStudy and a range of other measures. Other payments, sorry. This has been responsible and important. I would like to point out to the House that this base rate increase, which I introduced legislation into the Parliament today, will actually have indexation applied after the base rate is increased on the 20th of September, if it indeed passes the Senate. And I look forward to all of those across the Senate supporting that important piece of legislation. As also mentioned previously in question time today, we've increased the maximum rate of a Commonwealth rental assistance by 15%, the largest increase in over 30 years. Of course, that will have indexation applied as well. Many students do access Commonwealth rent assistance because they do access the private rental market, and therefore this payment and this increase will be very much welcomed by students right around the country. What we've done in this budget is have a carefully calibrated budget that delivers for those on income support, including students, and I hope that we will see the support across the Senate from all parties, including the crossbench, including those opposite, because it will make a real difference to people's lives.
Give a call to the member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories. Over the last 12 months, how has the Albanese Labor government abandoned previous poor practices in order to deliver for regional Australia and create a strong foundation for the future?
Call to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
Thank you, and I thank the member for her question, a strong advocate not only for her own regional community but for regional communities across the country. And on this side of the chamber, postcodes don't matter. We know we've got to deliver for all of Australia, and that's what we are doing. I hear the sea of suits. Really lovely to hear you today. But when you're in government, instead of playing a game of charades about what you thought government looked like, it's more than just a press release, a photo, a head nod in the back of a press conference. You actually had to do the delivery part, and that's what you forgot over the last 10 years. We've done more in the last 12 months than those did in 10 years because the regions are much more than just a grants program. Because we want regional Australia to seize the huge opportunities that come with the shift to cleaner and cheaper renewable energy, a shift that those opposite deliberately ignored for a decade. But first, we've got to clean up the mess that was left by those opposite. And every time we've looked at the big regional programs dreamt up by those opposite, we've found real problems for our communities. An inland rail project that blew out by approximately $31 billion. An infrastructure pipeline where the projects blew out from 150 to 800 without any additional funding, and projects that were promised with no funding partners or without any business cases. It's like an episode of Utopia. So many promises over those 10 years and nothing delivered. The only difference is Utopia is funny, they are not. In 12 months we've delivered more and we are laying the foundations for a better future for our communities across the country. In our very first budget, we delivered and committed $1 billion to new regional programs. And unlike those opposite, we've spent time to make sure that the programs that we're delivering will be delivered in a fair, transparent and accountable way. It'll be a fair process done, not one with the colour-coded spreadsheets, because we know regional Australians deserve much more than an ad hoc grants round. They want real programs to deliver real outcomes. We've already provided increased connectivity by properly funding the NBN and fixing mobile phone black spots, housing assistance through the regional first home buyers scheme, skills assistance through free TAFE places and more university places, funds for increased disaster resilience and mitigation. And I note those laughing opposite about black spot funds in natural disaster-prone electorates. Shame on you. In our most recent budget, we continue to help regional Australians.
The Minister in continuation.
In our most regional budget, we helped regional Australians by tripling the bulk billing incentive, establishing a net zero authority and committing $1 billion to the National Biosecurity System. We have done more in 12 months to deliver than those did in 10 years, and you should be ashamed of yourself for the way you've acted today.
Order. The member for Wannon will resume his seat. The member for McEwen is warned. I'll call the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Order.